Hi, I'm Jay Richards. We're here at the COSM Technology Summit 2023 in Bellevue, Washington. And we just ended a panel actually talking about AI and transportation solutions. I know for years I've been following this issue. I can remember in 2017 and 18 being told by the skeptics that we were going to have self-driving cars in 5 years. Here we are in 2023. We haven't quite gotten there yet. And so that's sort of the question, and that was actually the subject of the panel. I'm joined by one of the panelists, Dorothy Li, who was for 23 years at Amazon. The last 8 years that she was there, she was at Amazon Web Services. She was most recently at Convoy, and is here to talk about these details. Dorothy, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so where do you think we are? Just kind of the macro question. There's the sort of broad question about the use of AI for technology solutions and traffic patterns and things like that. But there's also this question about self-driving cars. And the thing I'm interested in that I know you know a lot about, which is more automated long-haul truck solutions. So where are we here at the end of 2023?
Well, I think we're at a really exciting times in terms of technology in general, but also particularly technology in transportation. So by way of introduction, I came to transportation and trucking in 2020 in the height of pandemic, where you couldn't turn on TV without hearing about, shortage, driving shortage. But it's actually a little bit of a myth the more I got into it. It's not necessarily we have a shortage of driver capacity. In fact, right now we have an oversupply of capacity. The real issue in transportation, particularly acute in trucking, is the inefficiency.
Yes.
And if you look at the number of empty miles in trucking, we did a study earlier on.
Over 30,
the trucks go on empty, just running idle,
right.
and that's over 30% of the time. That's idle for a number of different reasons because of all the inefficiency. Most of the time, the truck driver is sort of waiting. He's either waiting on the dock, waiting to get rescheduled because something didn't happen, or the trailer breaks down. So that's just sort of the tackling the inefficiency. I think is one of the biggest problems. I think ML and AI can help, and we're starting to see, and I was talking to someone earlier, that the digitization for this industry in the last few years has been really accelerated by the likes of Convoy and Flexport and many other companies. And so it is happening, and it will happen. Back to autonomous driving.
Yes.
When we think about, it's almost like the evolution of AI, at the hype, at the peak of every hype cycle, we tend to be more optimistic about the adoption, and we tend to forget about reality. And that reality, as you know, is particularly complex when you enter the physical world.
Yes.
You've got stuff breaking down, truck breaking down. Somebody has to go, inspect and fix it. And so it's more complex than just sort of in the pure software world.
Yeah.
But I think that's where I get really optimistic about, particularly this wave of generative AI technology. When you think about the ways, even at Convoy for the past few years, the way we would solve these problems. Again, in transportation, exception is the norm, right?
Sure.
90% of the time, you're dealing with exceptional cases where stuff breaks down, as opposed to happy case. And so the previous generation of technology would say, well, okay, I have an exception. I have a workflow here.
Yeah.
Let me solve this by RPA. Let me build a workflow, and you write a program that build that particular kind of workflow. Or you do ML that sort of, it's more declarative or imperative.
Yeah.
But then with generative AI, at least the promise and what I've seen is that AI can adapt, right? It takes on that almost some common sense of a human that says, okay, I'm driving from Seattle to Bellevue, 520 is closed.
Yeah.
What maybe
do?
Take a different route.
Yeah.
And so it's taking on that, sort of more, that again, it can generate solutions as opposed
sort of intuitive space that humans are really good at.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think what makes me super excited about using generative AI in the realm of tackling complexity.
Okay.
Especially in the transportation world.
Well, and at least my own sort of conceiving of this some years ago is I imagined, well, if anything, long haul trucking when it's on highway, that's a lot simpler than what the Amazon driver in downtown Seattle is doing.
Yes.
So I figured that'll be the first one to get solved. But several of the panelists discussed the fact that there's still kind of a dearth of data with the trucks. It's not, we don't have a truck equivalent to what's happening with these cars that are just continually collecting information. I didn't really realize it. Is that part of the problem?
It's part of the problem, although you can solve that with sensors and lidars and things like that.
Yeah.
But the other part is when you think about long haul is, you're on the highway, but then you need to get off of the highway. And so maybe on the highway it's easier to solve, but then inevitably you have to go to exit, and there's also situations in the highway that you don't anticipate. Yes, it might seem like, but at the same time, if you have an accident, it's catastrophic. And so what we thought was that what may most likely happen at first is you have team drivers.
Yes.
Right? You have co-pilot. And we're hoping that co-pilot concept is happening everywhere. And I think that's very applicable in the transportation world as well, because with this technology and with generative AI, the human judgment is still important. It's crucial.
Yeah. And then maybe in some ways, if we downgrade our near-term expectations so that we just accept the fact that getting 95% of the way there is one thing, maybe getting 96% of the way there, it's an order of magnitude more difficult.
Absolutely.
So we've got to find that sweet spot, because we sort of imagine these trucks sort of driving all by themselves. What we might have is, as you say, maybe one driver sort of in charge of 5 cars so that they're always sort of the input or something like that.
Correct.
And so, so do you have a sense, if you were just going to guess, like when we're going to see, because at the moment, it's just still exactly like it was, right? It's one driver, one truck. There's some improvements, of course, around the edges, but we haven't seen any kind of, major change.
I think we're going to see, like any software adoption, I think it's got fits and, and it's not definitely linear. And then, also with the electrification of cars, there's not just the technology, there's also the infrastructure around it as well. If you talk about, for example, the adoption of electric vehicle, the infrastructure around power consumption is really important. We heard, Rich earlier talked about the fact that we don't have it's not a grid issue. It's a smoothing the curve of power consumption. And when we did a pilot early on with some of the electric vehicle companies, going from, for example, Long Beach in California to distribution center, just the power consumption itself is often problematic.
It's massive.
So the state of California has actually mandated such that all trucks starting, I think it's from 2024, need to either be hybrid or be electric.
Oh, my word.
And so, but there's very real infrastructure problems that we need to solve. And not only making sure that we have charging stations, and so that these trucks, and they also already have a range issue, but you need to have charging stations that's appropriate for the range. But also we can have optimal power consumption such that they can maybe charge at a time where not everyone is turning on the air conditioning.
Yes, exactly. And then you have the dilemma that it's one thing to have a Tesla for yourself, but the sort of just the power needs, the straight horsepower needs that trucks have, right?
It's huge, right? If you do a semi-truck, it needs to be, it's almost I think I'm probably going to get the stat wrong, but to power a few semi-trucks, you need almost the power to power a building.
Oh, yeah, easily. I've seen, and I can't remember the statistic, but a few trucks can be the equivalent of a small city.
That's right.
Yeah, it's really crazy stuff. But what's frustrating is that you started by talking about this 30% of trucking in which trucks are moving around doing something and empty. That seems like low-hanging fruit, right? It's just the kind of thing you would think AI might be very helpful in solving, and that's just an improvement in efficiency of what we're doing right now before we ever get to these sort of fundamentally new ways of doing things.
Absolutely. I think ML and AI, what we've seen is where it can absolutely solve some of it. but it's also not enough for one company to do it. We
Yes.
really need multiple companies to come together and solving these. So when we were, earlier, Uber Freight, Convoy, and JB Hunt has started a consortium, for
Okay.
example, to start tackling some of the inefficiencies starting from scheduling. A lot of the scheduling, for a truck driver is to get to a facility on time, and rescheduling is really it doesn't sound sexy at all, but
Right.
it's really a lot of the crux of the issue for where a lot of the kind of the inefficiency starts.
Absolutely.
And it's not just sort of one company. It needs all these companies together, especially, and to pair up with, in the trucking world, we have these TMS providers where we can kind of come together to solve these problems. And I think that's one particular, that's one example, but there are many of these examples that I think multiple companies coming together to create standards can really move the needle.
So do you think, realistically within, let's just make it a decade time scale, that 10 years out, we will have sort of passed over to a qualitatively different way of doing things, or is this going to be, the future is just simply unknown? What's your gut?
My gut is that the way, especially with this latest generative AI technology, the way we work will be different.
Okay.
You will certainly are continuing to see, and we'll see more and more co-pilot use cases. The way we, you think about even a trailer inspector. Today he might go on site and inspect the trailer, but the technology is already here that you can upload images and have what you might call a robo-inspector pointing out problems. And so I think that's going to absolutely change the way we work. And autonomous vehicle, some of my friends had actually experienced Cruise in San Francisco. And I think that technology, again, will be there, but I think it's a matter of whether we have laws and regulations that will also can help either hinder or accelerate the adoption. That's unknown. And if we see how our government has started to act on AI regulation, I'm hopeful.
Yes, it's going to take some deft thinking. The nice thing about a federal system is that we could have different states and different cities doing somewhat different things, so that we sort of test these things out. But for the longest time, people intuitively say, "Well, I would never trust a self-driving car. It might make mistakes." I say, well, it doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to be better than humans. That seems like a low bar, right? But it's actually not. It's Moravec's paradox. We know it applies to robots, but it seems that it also applies to driving.
For sure. And I think we see this movie played out in every new technology, probably when airline is first introduced. And so it really needs government. And we cannot leave it to cities and companies themselves, to act together. And I think recent events have made me pretty hopeful that we can come together and really using this really powerful technology to solve some of the hardest problems in our society. And it's problem very much worth solving.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're thinking about the 30% inefficiencies in trucks. I honestly, what drives me crazy is all the cars that are actually just sitting idle 99% of the time, right? It's a huge amount of latent capacity that we have that's just sort of offline. So, Dorothy Li, thanks so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us. We are here at COSM 2023.